Picture this: a grand library, its towering shelves once filled with wisdom, now standing silent under layers of dust. The pages of forgotten books curl at the edges, their words untouched by human hands for years. The air is thick with the weight of unread ideas, stories untold, and lessons unlearned. This isn't just a place left behind. It's a symbol of something deeper, the slow fading of inner thought in a world that never stops moving. How did we get here? How did the quiet pursuit of reflection, the kind that shaped minds like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, become a relic of the past? The answer lies in the relentless rush of modern life. Notifications buzz, screens flicker, and our attention is pulled in a dozen directions at once. The very spaces meant for deep thinking, libraries, quiet corners, even our own minds have been pushed aside, replaced by the endless noise of distraction. But here's the surprising truth: this isn't just about books gathering dust. It's about what happens when we lose the habit of looking inward, when we trade the richness of contemplation for the shallow glow of constant stimulation. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." What if that strength, that clarity, is exactly what we've been missing? This is where Stoicism steps in, not as an ancient philosophy locked in the past, but as a lifeline to reclaim the depth we've lost. Imagine rewiring your mind to find focus in chaos, to cultivate stillness even when the world demands your attention. That's the journey we're about to take. We'll explore how Stoic principles can help us rebuild the inner libraries of our minds, filling them with the kind of thought that doesn't just react to life but truly understands it. By the end, you'll see how these timeless ideas can turn the tide against distraction, bringing back the quiet power of reflection in a world that's forgotten how to listen. So let's begin, not by mourning what's been lost, but by rediscovering what's always been within us. What happens when we stop seeking wisdom? The answer isn't just found in empty libraries, it's written in the distracted rhythms of our daily lives. Stoicism reminds us that true knowledge isn't something we stumble upon by chance. It's cultivated through deliberate, quiet reflection. Seneca put it plainly: "You must retire into yourself if you would find real rest." Think about that for a moment. In a world where solitude is often mistaken for loneliness and stillness feels like wasted time, we've forgotten how to sit with our own thoughts. Ancient libraries weren't just buildings, they were sanctuaries where people wrestled with big ideas, where the friction of deep thinking sparked breakthroughs. Today, we've traded those hushed halls for the endless scroll of a feed, the illusion of connection replacing the hard work of understanding ourselves. Consider this contrast. In Rome, the great libraries were gathering places for minds hungry to learn, to debate, to refine their thinking. Now we carry more information in our pockets than those libraries ever held, yet how often do we pause to question, to reflect, to let an idea truly settle? The noise isn't just outside us, it's seeped into our inner world, leaving little room for the kind of self-reliant Stoics championed. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not in a crowded forum, but in the quiet of his tent during military campaigns. He understood that clarity comes from turning inward, even in chaos. So here's a challenge. When was the last time you stepped away from the noise to engage in real reflection? Not just skimming an article or listening to a podcast, but sitting with a single thought, probing it, testing it against your own experience. That's where wisdom takes root. The abandoned libraries around us are more than relics, they're warnings. They show what happens when we outsource our thinking to the rush of the external world. But the good news, the library of your mind is still there, waiting. You don't need a marble hall or a leather-bound book to access it. You just need the courage to close the door, sit with the silence, and listen. Epictetus once said, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." That simple truth cuts through the noise of modern life like a knife. We live in an age that worships busyness, where packed schedules and endless to-do lists are worn like badges of honor. But what if this constant motion is just an illusion? What if our obsession with productivity is actually stealing from us the very thing the Stoics held sacred, the quality of our thoughts? Look around. Libraries crumble while notifications pile up. We scroll mindlessly instead of sitting with a single profound idea. The irony is staggering. We have more tools for efficiency than ever, yet less time for reflection. Marcus Aurelius warned, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." If today were your last, would you spend it drowning in emails, or would you seek the clarity that comes from deep, deliberate thought? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Busyness is often a distraction from ourselves. We fill every gap with activity because stillness feels like emptiness. But the Stoics knew better. They understood that real growth happens in the pauses, in those unguarded moments when we confront our own minds. Think of your phone. How many unread books could fit into the hours spent scrolling? Those books are like the abandoned libraries full of wisdom we tell ourselves we'll get to someday. But life, as Marcus reminds us, doesn't wait. So let's try something radical. For one day, track every distraction, every pointless click, every habit masquerading as productivity. Then ask, does this serve my growth or just my avoidance? The Stoics didn't shun action, they mastered purposeful action. They built inner libraries of thought so robust that no external chaos could shake them. Your challenge isn't to do more, it's to choose better, to reclaim the space between tasks as sacred ground for thinking, because a life unexamined isn't just busy, it's missed. We gather information like stones in a riverbed, smooth, plentiful, but never truly ours. Scroll through any feed, and you'll find endless facts, quotes, and hot takes, all consumed in seconds and forgotten just as fast. But here's the paradox: the more we collect, the less we actually know. Seneca saw this coming 2,000 years ago when he wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." He wasn't just talking about travel, he was warning us about the illusion of knowledge without depth. Think about those abandoned libraries again. Their books weren't discarded because they lacked value. They were left behind because we stopped believing in the slow, messy work of true understanding. Stoicism offers a radical alternative: mastery over mere exposure. The Stoics didn't just read, they wrestled with texts, returning to the same passages for years, testing them against life's complexities. Marcus Aurelius carried Epictetus' teachings into battle, not as vague inspiration, but as a manual to live by. Compare that to today's endless skimming, clicking through articles, saving posts we'll never revisit, mistaking recognition for wisdom. Social media didn't create this problem. It simply magnified our oldest weakness, the temptation to confuse quantity with quality. Every time we scroll past a profound idea without pausing, we're building a library we'll never visit. So let's try an experiment. Pick one book this month, just one, and treat it like a Stoic would. Read it slowly, underline sentences that challenge you. Return to them on different days, in different moods. See how the words change when you're tired versus when you're alert, when life is calm versus when it's chaotic. That's how knowledge becomes wisdom. Seneca practiced this daily, writing, "You must linger among a limited number of master thinkers and digest their works if you would derive ideas which shall win firm hold in your mind." Notice the verbs he chose: linger, digest, derive. These aren't actions for the hurried or the distracted. They're the practices of someone building an inner library meant to last. The next time you feel the pull to consume more, ask yourself, am I collecting or comprehending? The abandoned libraries of the world are filled with books that were read once, then shelved forever. Don't let your mind become another dusty archive. Choose depth. Let a single idea change you. That's where real learning begins. Ancient texts weren't designed for haste. Scrolls demanded careful unrolling, ink required time to dry, and every word had to be copied by hand, a process that could take months. There was no skipping to the highlights or skimming for key points. If you wanted wisdom, you had to slow down. The Stoics didn't just accept this pace, they revered it. Patience wasn't a limitation to them, it was the very soil where understanding took root. Epictetus, born a slave and no stranger to hardship, put it bluntly: if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That's the essence of real patience, the willingness to sit with uncertainty, to let answers unfold in their own time. Now compare that to how we learn today. A question pops into your head, and within seconds, Google serves up a dozen answers, each one competing to be the fastest, slickest solution. We've trained ourselves to expect instant clarity, mistaking speed for depth. But here's what gets lost in the rush: the friction of slow reading, the kind where you chew on a single sentence for hours, letting it reshape your thinking. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, returning to the same passages in his meditations year after year, finding new meaning as his life changed. That's the difference between collecting information and cultivating wisdom. One fills your notebook, the other rewires your mind. Try this experiment. Next time you're waiting for a meal, an appointment, even a traffic light, resist the reflex to pull out your phone. Instead, let the delay become a moment of observation. Notice the tension in your body, the itch to fill the silence, that discomfort. It's the sound of your patience muscles growing. The Stoics called this voluntary hardship, choosing small deprivations to strengthen your resolve. They fasted not because food was scarce, but to remember they could endure hunger. They slept on the floor not for lack of beds, but to prove comfort didn't own them. So here's your challenge: pick one article or book chapter this week and read it the old-fashioned way. No highlights, no speed reading, no distractions. Let yourself linger on the parts that confuse you. Underline a single sentence and carry it with you all day, testing it against your experiences. Patience isn't just about waiting, it's about what happens in the space between the question and the answer. Those abandoned libraries didn't fail because they were slow. They were abandoned because we forgot that some truths can't be rushed. Marcus Aurelius ended each day with a simple ritual. He would retreat into his thoughts, replaying the events of the hours gone by like scenes on a scroll. What had he done well? Where had he faltered? This nightly reckoning wasn't just self-assessment. It was the deliberate sharpening of memory, turning fleeting moments into lasting lessons. The Stoics understood something profound. Memory isn't just recall, it's the foundation of character. Every decision we forget is a chance for growth lost to time. Those crumbling books in abandoned libraries, they're more than decaying paper. They're warnings of what happens when we stop preserving wisdom, when teachings dissolve into the air like ink fading from an unopened page. Seneca took this further, urging his students to retire into the company of yourself each evening and review the day's lessons. Imagine holding up each action to the light, examining it for flaws like a jeweler inspecting a gem. This wasn't about guilt, it was about refinement. Modern life, though, has swapped deep reflection for shallow recording. We jot notes in apps that sync across devices, yet rarely revisit them. The act of writing by hand, the physical drag of pen on paper, forces engagement in a way typing can't replicate. Ancient Stoics didn't have cloud storage, but their journals survived centuries because they were written with intention, not convenience. Here's the tension. We've outsourced memory to algorithms, trusting reminders to ping us instead of training our minds to hold what matters. Compare that to Epictetus, who drilled his students in recalling core principles under pressure, ensuring their teachings weren't just understood but embodied. A forgotten lesson is like a book left to rot. The words still exist, but their power dies with neglect. So try this. Once a week, close the apps and open a notebook. Revisit one insight that struck you, not to skim, but to wrestle with it. Ask, how did this change me? Did I live it or just like it? Memory, when trained, becomes more than storage. It becomes the loom where wisdom weaves itself into behavior. The Stoics didn't just want you to learn, they wanted you to remember, and in remembering, to transform. Why do we rush past weathered classics to chase whatever flashes brightest on our screens? Those abandoned libraries didn't just lose readers, they lost relevance in a world obsessed with novelty. We mistake freshness for importance, assuming that if something isn't trending, it isn't worth our time. But the Stoics stood firmly against this tide. Marcus Aurelius warned, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them knows anything about the subject." Imagine walking through those dusty library aisles today. The books that remain aren't outdated, they're time-tested. Their pages hold ideas that outlasted empires precisely because they weren't tailored to fleeting tastes. Take a single modern bestseller, a book hyped on every podcast, stacked in airport shops. Now place it beside Marcus's Meditations, a text scribbled in candlelight 2,000 years ago. Which one still shapes lives today? Viral content thrives on urgency, shouting, "Read me now," while philosophy whispers, "Return to me when you're ready." The Stoics weren't against new ideas, they were against mistaking novelty for substance. Seneca spent years revisiting the same handful of thinkers, writing, "We need to set our affections on some good man and keep him constantly before our eyes so that we may live as if he were watching us." That's the opposite of today's endless scroll. It's choosing depth over distraction, legacy over likes. Here's the uncomfortable question. When you last chose a book, did you pick it because it spoke to something eternal within you, or because everyone was talking about it? The tyranny of novelty lies in its illusion of progress. We convince ourselves that consuming the latest think piece or life hack moves us forward, when often it just scatters our attention. The Stoics practiced something radical: ruthless selectivity. They filtered the noise to focus on what endured. Epictetus, born into slavery, had no patience for trends. He taught, first learn the meaning of what you say and then speak. That discipline, the pause between impulse and action, is what's missing in our rush to consume and discard. So here's your invitation. Walk to your bookshelf and pull out an old favorite, the one whose spine you haven't touched in years. Open it to any page and read slowly, as if meeting an old friend. Notice how the words land differently now that life has weathered you. That's the gift of perennial wisdom. It grows with you. The abandoned libraries remind us that trends fade, but truth remains. The next time you feel pulled toward the shiny and new, ask yourself, will this matter in 10 years? If not, perhaps it's worth leaving space for what will. Seneca's letters cut straight to the heart of our modern dilemma. The mind that is distracted by varied interests grows weak. Picture him in his study, surrounded by scrolls, yet focusing on one thought at a time, deliberately, ruthlessly. That's the discipline we've lost. Those abandoned libraries aren't just monuments to forgotten books, they're mirrors reflecting our fractured attention. Every unread volume represents a choice to scatter our focus rather than sharpen it. The Stoics didn't just preach concentration, they treated it as a lifeline. In a world of endless distractions, the ability to focus isn't just useful, it's revolutionary. Epictetus put it bluntly, if you seek tranquility, do less. Not nothing, just less, but better. He wasn't advocating laziness, he was demanding mastery over impulses. Consider how we read today, skimming while half listening to a podcast, checking notifications between paragraphs. Compare that to the deep, immersive reading of the past, where a single page could occupy an entire evening. The difference isn't speed, it's depth. Multitasking doesn't make us productive, it makes us shallow. Every divided moment is a trade-off, the illusion of efficiency for the erosion of understanding. Here's the challenge: carve out 1 hour today for undistracted thought. Not meditation, not passive listening, but active engagement with a single idea. Pick a passage from Seneca or Marcus Aurelius and wrestle with it. Underline sentences that unsettle you. Argue with them in the margins. This isn't about nostalgia for old books. It's about reclaiming a way of thinking that modern life has nearly erased. The Stoics didn't have smartphones, but they faced their own distractions: gossip in the agora, the clamor of politics, the lure of luxury. Their solution: a daily practice of saying no to mental clutter, to trivial pursuits, to anything that diluted their purpose. Try this experiment. Notice how often your hand reaches for your phone without thought. That's not habit, it's conditioning. The discipline of attention begins with recognizing these impulses, then choosing differently. Epictetus compared the untrained mind to a jar of murky water stirred up by every passing disturbance. Clarity comes not from adding more, but from letting the sediment settle. Those empty libraries remind us what's at stake, not just lost knowledge, but the very capacity to think deeply. The next time you're tempted to split your focus, ask yourself, is this serving my growth or just my restlessness? The answer might surprise you. Empty libraries unsettle us not because of their silence, but because of what that silence reveals: our own discomfort with being alone. Walk through those deserted aisles and you'll feel it, the uneasy sense that something's missing. But what if the absence isn't the problem? What if the real loss is our ability to sit with ourselves, to face the quiet without reaching for distraction? The Stoics didn't just tolerate solitude, they revered it as the forge where character is shaped. Seneca wrote, "Be wary of the crowd. It's not people that disturb you, but the judgments you carry about them." That's the paradox. We flee empty spaces because they force us to confront the noise we've internalized. Consider the ancient monasteries, where scholars would spend years in isolation, not to escape the world, but to understand it more deeply. Their cells weren't prisons, they were laboratories for the mind. Compare that to today's relentless connectivity, the pings and alerts that fragment our attention into smaller and smaller pieces. We've confused companionship with clutter, filling every moment with voices so we never have to hear our own. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire, yet he carved out solitude daily, writing, "Nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He didn't seek emptiness, he sought clarity. Here's the challenge: take a walk today, just you, no devices, no podcasts, no playlist. Let the silence settle around you like dust in an old library. Notice the urge to reach for your phone, the itch to fill the void. That discomfort, it's the sound of your mind waking up. The Stoics called this the art of retreat, not running from life but returning to yourself. Seneca practiced it religiously, advising, "Make yourself a stranger to busyness so you can become present to wisdom." You don't need a desert or a mountaintop. Start with 10 minutes. Sit with a single question. What am I avoiding by staying busy? The answer might surprise you. Those abandoned libraries aren't just relics of a bygone era. They're mirrors. The next time you pass one, ask yourself, when did I last seek the kind of silence that shelves demand? Not the absence of sound, but the presence of thought. That's where the Stoics found their strength, not in crowds, but in the quiet corners where the mind finally gets its turn to speak. Those crumbling books aren't just victims of time, they're casualties of a deeper erosion. Crack open a waterlogged volume, and you'll find pages where arguments once thrived, where minds clashed over ideas like swords testing their mettle. Libraries weren't just storage for knowledge, they were arenas for critical thought. The Stoics knew this better than anyone. They didn't just absorb wisdom, they interrogated it. Epictetus laid it bare: first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. But that transformation begins with a question most of us avoid: why do I believe what I believe? Consider the Socratic method, the backbone of Stoic training. Socrates didn't lecture, he probed, exposing contradictions until his students squirmed with clarity. The Stoics adopted this ruthlessly. When a student parroted popular opinion, Epictetus would stop them cold. You're swallowing ideas whole like a fish gulping bait. Chew first. That's the muscle we've let atrophy. Today, algorithms serve us pre-chewed beliefs tailored to our existing biases. We mistake agreement for truth, surrounding ourselves with voices that nod along rather than challenge. Ancient libraries forced confrontation. Opposing viewpoints shared the same shelf. Now, we curate intellectual safe spaces, mistaking comfort for enlightenment. Here's the test. When was the last time you deliberately sought out an idea that made you uncomfortable? Not to dismiss it, but to dissect it. The Stoics called this prosouch attention, so sharp it cuts through illusion. Marcus Aurelius practiced it daily, writing, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." Imagine applying that lens to your next social media scroll. Those rotting books didn't fail us. We failed them by replacing dialectic with dopamine hits. So try this today. Pick one belief you hold dearly and argue against it, not as a straw man, but with the rigor of a Stoic. Find the weakest point in your own position and press on it like a bruise. That's how libraries stay alive, not by preserving ideas, but by testing them. The next time you see a crumbling spine on a forgotten book, remember, it's not the pages that are fragile, it's our willingness to question. Even the greatest libraries, built to last centuries, eventually surrender to time. Marble cracks, ink fades, and the voices of generations whisper into silence. The Stoics saw this coming not as tragedy, but as truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died and returned to the same state." That jarring comparison wasn't meant to shock, it was medicine for the soul. Premeditatio malorum, the Stoic practice of foreseeing loss, wasn't about pessimism. It was about liberation. By imagining the destruction of what we hold dear, we drain it of its power to devastate us. Consider the Library of Alexandria, its vast halls reduced to ashes. Scholars wept as scrolls burned, yet within decades, new centers of learning rose elsewhere. The Stoics would nod knowingly. Their philosophy thrived not by resisting impermanence, but by embracing it. Epictetus, born into slavery, carried nothing but his teachings precisely because no one could take them away. Now contrast that with our digital age. We back up photos to clouds, store thoughts on servers, trusting technology to outlast time itself. But servers crash, formats become obsolete. The very tools we rely on for permanence may vanish faster than parchment. Here's the revelation hidden in those decaying stacks. Preparing for loss isn't defeat, it's strategy. Seneca kept his wealth but practiced poverty, writing, "Set aside certain days to be content with the scantiest fare." Why? To prove his comfort didn't own him. Modern life offers the opposite temptation. We hoard digital memories like dragon's treasure, terrified of forgetting. But the Stoics ask a different question. What if forgetting isn't the enemy? What if the act of letting go strengthens what remains? Try this exercise. Walk through your home and select 5 physical objects that anchor your identity: a book, a photo, an heirloom. Now imagine them gone. Notice the resistance that flares up. That tension is where Stoic wisdom begins. Marcus Aurelius meditated daily on his own death, not to brood but to clarify. Stripped of everything, what would still be yours? The answer isn't in the library's ruins, but in the space they leave behind, the enduring capacity to think, to choose, to find meaning in the ephemeral. The next time you pass an abandoned building, let it ask you this: what would you carry if the walls fell tomorrow? Not in your hands, but in your bones. Why do we keep books we'll never read? Not just 1 or 2, but shelves crammed with untouched spines, gathering dust like artifacts in a museum we never visit. There's a quiet irony here. We celebrate the idea of knowledge, yet we treat books as decorations, objects to display rather than tools to transform us. The Stoics saw this coming. Seneca warned, "It's not the lack of books that holds us back, but the failure to digest them." He wasn't just talking about reading, he was exposing a deeper trap: the confusion between ownership and wisdom. Collecting books can become its own kind of distraction, a way to feel productive without doing the real work of reflection. Consider the weight of all those unread pages. Every untouched book is a promise unkept, an idea waiting to be lived. The Stoics practiced something radical: detachment from possessions, even the ones that seemed noble. Marcus Aurelius, as emperor, could have filled palaces with scrolls. Instead, he carried a handful of texts, ones he actually studied, debated, and tested against life's challenges. The difference between his library and ours: his wasn't a shrine to potential, it was a workshop for the mind. Today, we mistake accumulation for growth, as if the mere presence of books on a shelf could magically make us wiser. But wisdom isn't stored in ink and paper. It's forged in the friction between thought and action. Take a look at your own shelves. How many books have you kept out of guilt or aspiration rather than genuine use? Seneca put it bluntly: to own is to be owned. Each unread book isn't just taking up space, it's a silent demand, a reminder of something you haven't done. The Stoics didn't reject books, they rejected the burden of meaningless ownership. They prized depth over volume, returning to the same passages for years until the words bled into their bones. Compare that to our modern habit of skimming, saving, and moving on, never letting an idea settle long enough to change us. Here's the challenge: walk to your bookshelf right now and pull out 1 book you haven't touched in over a year. Hold it in your hands and ask, did this make me wiser or just feel like it might? If the answer isn't immediate, consider passing it on. Donate it to a library, a friend, or a stranger, someone who might actually wrestle with its ideas. The Stoics didn't fear empty shelves, they feared cluttered minds. By letting go of what we don't use, we create space for what truly matters, not the illusion of knowledge, but the practice of it. Because a book unread is just paper, a book lived, that's philosophy. The hush of an abandoned library speaks louder than its missing voices. Those empty reading rooms weren't just places to consume words, they were spaces where ideas collided, where minds sharpened each other like blades on stone. The Stoics didn't just read in isolation, they argued, questioned, and refined their thinking through relentless dialogue. Seneca wrote letters not as monologues, but as sparks to ignite conversation. Epictetus transformed his classroom into a verbal gymnasium where students practiced philosophy like wrestlers testing holds. Nature gave us 1 tongue but 2 ears, he'd say, so we might listen twice as much as we speak. That ratio feels foreign today when every platform rewards volume over depth. reaction over reflection. Walk through the ruins of Alexandria or the silent stacks of a shuttered public library, and you'll feel the absence of something vital, the hum of debate, the friction of opposing viewpoints held respectfully. Ancient libraries thrived on this energy, scholars arguing over scrolls, students dissecting texts line by line. Compare that to today's digital discourse, where threads unravel into shouting matches and algorithms amplify extremes. The Stoics practiced dialectic not to win, but to uncover truth. They knew real growth happens when ideas are stress-tested, when someone points out the flaw in your logic before life does. Marcus Aurelius thanked the gods for critics, writing, "When anyone contradicts me, he's showing me a blind spot I might have missed." Here's the paradox: we've never had more tools for connection, yet genuine dialogue is vanishing. Social media replaces conversation with performance, hot takes fired like arrows, replies crafted for applause rather than understanding, the Stoic alternative. Structured, purposeful exchange. Imagine a modern symposium where participants follow Epictetus' rule. First, learn the meaning of what you say and then speak. No interruptions, no straw-man arguments, just the patient pursuit of clarity. So here's an experiment. Gather 3 friends for a Stoic dialogue night. Pick a single question. What does it mean to live virtuously? Or how do we distinguish control from surrender? And set ground rules. No one speaks twice until everyone has spoken once. Every argument must paraphrase the last speaker's point accurately before adding new thoughts. You'll quickly feel the difference between talking past each other and thinking together. Those silent libraries remind us that books alone aren't enough. Wisdom needs oxygen, the back and forth breath of minds engaging, challenging, and sometimes changing each other. The next time you see an empty reading room, ask yourself, when did I last have a conversation that left me wiser, not just louder? Standing before a library shelf crammed with thousands of untouched books can feel eerily similar to staring at a blinking cursor on an empty document. Both leave us paralyzed by possibility. When every choice carries the weight of missed alternatives, we freeze. The Stoics diagnosed this ailment centuries before modern psychology coined decision fatigue. Clutter isn't just physical, it's cognitive. Marcus Aurelius cut through the noise with surgical precision. If you seek tranquility, do less, or rather, do what's essential. Do less, but better. Notice what he didn't say: do everything moderately. The Stoic approach wasn't about balance, it was about ruthless prioritization, stacking life's decisions like a pyramid with virtue as the foundation. Consider 2 students. One drowns in a 20-book reading list, skimming each without retention, while another selects 2 texts and annotates every page. Both might spend equal hours, but only the second emerges transformed. Seneca observed this in his pupils. They learn not for life, but for the lecture hall. The difference lies in what the Stoics called prohesis, the willful narrowing of focus to what's within our control. Ancient libraries weren't designed for browsing. Scholars requested specific scrolls because they knew wisdom grows through depth, not exposure. Today, we mistake abundance for advantage, forgetting that a fire hose drowns as easily as it nourishes. Here's the experiment for 1 week. Impose a Stoic filter on your media diet. Before clicking any article or video, ask Marcus's question. Is this necessary? Not interesting, not entertaining, necessary. You'll quickly notice how much content exists solely to fill space, like untouched books on overcrowded shelves. Epictetus trained his students to confront this daily. If you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless about unimportant matters. That's the secret, not ignorance but intentional selectivity. The abandoned libraries we've explored aren't just casualties of neglect. they're victims of overwhelm. When every shelf overflows, nothing stands out. The Stoic remedy: prune mercilessly. Let your attention be drawn not to what glitters, but to what endures. Start small. Today, choose one idea instead of 10. Wrestle with it, test it, let it shape you, because a single thought lived deeply outshines 1,000 skimmed. We call it progress: faster phones, smarter homes, endless streams of information at our fingertips. But walk through those abandoned libraries again and ask yourself, what if progress isn't measured in gadgets, but in the depth of our character? The Stoics would scoff at our obsession with externals. Seneca saw it clearly. What's the point of conquering space if we're enslaved by our own minds? Those dusty shelves hold a mirror to our illusion that convenience equals advancement, that speed equals wisdom. The ancient Romans had no electric lights, yet they wrestled with questions of integrity, purpose, and resilience that still outshine our brightest screens. Consider two versions of stress. A Stoic philosopher like Epictetus, sold into slavery as a child, facing daily brutality, yet writing, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters." Contrast that with our modern angst: the overwhelm of too many tabs open, the paralysis of infinite choices. Technology solved ancient problems of survival, but created new ones of the spirit. The Stoics wouldn't judge us for using tools, but for mistaking them as the end goal. Marcus Aurelius ruled the known world with quill and parchment, yet his meditations never once mentioned the Roman Empire's roads or aqueducts as markers of progress. His measure: waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. Here's the uncomfortable truth hidden in those empty libraries. Our ancestors built institutions to cultivate wisdom, while we optimize for distraction. A first-century student might spend months copying a single text by hand, absorbing each word through the labor of pen and ink. Today, we swipe past life-changing ideas in seconds, mistaking recognition for understanding. Seneca warned of this exact trap. Men learn while they teach, meaning real growth comes from engagement, not passive consumption. The books rotting on those shelves didn't fail. We did, by valuing the new over the meaningful. So try this reframe. For one day, track your progress, not by tasks completed, but by moments of genuine growth. Did you react with patience when irritation flared? Did you choose depth over distraction? The Stoics called this procope, the true measure of advancement. Those abandoned libraries aren't just relics, they're report cards. Their decay asks us, are you really moving forward or just moving faster? Why do we crave likes and shares more than thoughtful critique? Those abandoned libraries hold a clue. Their dusty books weren't written for applause, but for truth. Today, we measure ideas by their virality, not their depth, trading lasting wisdom for fleeting validation. The Stoics saw this trap coming. Epictetus warned, if someone told you that others spoke ill of you, would you rush to defend yourself? Then why worry when they praise you? That's the essence of the Stoic inner citadel, a mental fortress where self-worth isn't borrowed from external opinions, but built on unshakable virtue. Consider the irony. A medieval scribe might spend years illuminating a single manuscript, knowing only a handful of monks would ever see it. Compare that to today's content mills, where creators churn out disposable posts optimized for algorithms. Viral content thrives on novelty, engineered to trigger shares before disappearing into the digital ether. Meanwhile, Marcus Aurelius' meditations, written as private reflections with no intended audience, outlasted empires precisely because they weren't crafted for applause. The Stoics understood something radical. True validation comes from aligning actions with principles, not accumulating external approval. Seneca put it bluntly, what's the point of counting admirers when you don't respect yourself? Here's the test hidden in those silent library stacks. When you last journaled or created something, who were you writing for, your deepest self or an imagined crowd? Social media trains us to perform rather than reflect, to polish our thoughts for consumption rather than scrutiny. Epictetus trained his students differently. He'd make them recite philosophy in public squares, not to gather praise, but to practice indifference to reactions. If you learn someone is mocking you, he said, respond with, they don't know my other faults, or they'd mention those too. That's not self-deprecation, it's liberation from the hunger for approval. Try this tonight. Write one paragraph about a belief you hold, not for posting, not even for keeping, just to examine it. Then ask, does this reflect my truth or what I think others want to hear? The abandoned libraries remind us that ideas written for validation die with the crowd's fickle tastes, while those written for understanding endure. Your inner citadel doesn't need likes to stand firm. It just needs you to stop knocking on its door, begging to be let in. Speed has become our silent tyrant, not just in how we move, but in how we think. Those empty reading rooms aren't just casualties of a busy world. They're crime scenes where contemplation was murdered by hurry. The Stoics understood something we've forgotten. Wisdom isn't found in the race to finish, but in the courage to pause. Seneca saw it 2,000 years ago. You must step away from the crowd and retire into yourself, for no one comes to wisdom without stillness. Notice what he didn't say: stillness isn't inactivity. It's the space where thought deepens, where ideas move from headlines in our minds to convictions in our bones. Take two readers. One tears through a book in an afternoon, highlighting passages to save for later, while another spends an hour on a single page, scribbling questions in the margins. The first collects quotes, the second confronts them. That's the difference between consuming and comprehending. Ancient libraries weren't designed for efficiency. Their very architecture, high ceilings, hushed aisles, forced slowness. Every scroll demanded effort to unroll. Every word required patience to decipher. The friction wasn't a flaw. It was the filter that separated casual interest from genuine engagement. Today, we've removed all friction, and with it, the transformative power of resistance. Here's the experiment hidden in Seneca's words. Carve out 10 minutes today for silent thought. Not meditation with an app, not background music, but pure, unscripted reflection. Sit with a single question: what am I avoiding by staying busy? And let it unravel without forcing answers. You'll quickly notice the itch to reach for your phone, the urge to fill the silence. That discomfort is the sound of your mind stretching after years of sitting still. The Stoics called this ascesis, the deliberate practice of discomfort to strengthen clarity. They didn't wait for quiet moments, they created them, even in chaos. Marcus Aurelius penned his meditations on battlefields, Epictetus taught in exile, and Seneca wrote his letters while political storms raged around him. Those abandoned reading rooms whisper a challenge: reclaim the lost art of pause, not as a luxury but as necessity, because speed doesn't just kill depth, it starves the very capacity to recognize what's missing. The next time you feel the pull to rush, ask yourself, is this urgency real or just habitual? Then take one deliberate breath, the kind that fills your lungs completely, and choose slowness. Wisdom, after all, isn't a trophy won in haste, but a seed that grows only in stillness. What will remain of us when we're gone? Not the trending posts we shared or the gadgets we upgraded, but the ideas we nurtured and the good we planted for others to harvest. Those abandoned libraries stand as silent witnesses to a troubling shift, from building legacies to chasing momentary wins. The Stoics called this cosmopolitanism, the radical idea that we're citizens of something far greater than our own lifetimes. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly: what benefits the hive benefits the bee. He didn't write those words as emperor, but as a man reminding himself that true meaning comes from contributing to the human story long after our chapter ends. Look around. Disposable culture surrounds us. Fast fashion, single-use tech, relationships measured in swipe counts. Ancient libraries were the opposite. Painstakingly copied manuscripts meant to outlast generations, each page a bridge between past and future minds. The Stoics saw time differently than we do. For them, the present wasn't just about immediate gratification. It was fertile ground for planting trees whose shade they'd never sit under. Seneca practiced this daily, writing letters to future thinkers like Lucilius, knowing full well their dialogue would echo beyond both their lifetimes. That's the essence of legacy, acting with tomorrow's inheritors in mind, not just today's audience. Consider two builders. One erects a flimsy booth for a day's market, while another lays stone foundations for a forum meant to stand centuries. Both worked hard, but only one understood why we build. Epictetus, born into slavery with no possessions to his name, left a legacy that outlasted empires, not through monuments, but through teachings that still reshape minds today. If you want to improve, he said, be content to be thought foolish in matters that bring no real benefit. What matters isn't applause in the moment, but substance that endures. Here's the challenge hidden in those crumbling stacks. Plan one action this week with no immediate payoff, something only future you or others will thank you for. Mentor someone without posting about it. Plant a tree whose maturity you'll never see. Write a letter to your future self with hard-won lessons. The Stoics measured wealth not in coins, but in what they could pass forward. Your library doesn't need marble columns, just one shelf filled with acts that whisper to the future. Someone cared enough to build this for you. Those untouched philosophy books gathering dust on the shelf, why do we keep passing them over for easier reads? The answer lies in the seductive lure of comfort, that quiet voice whispering, choose the path of least resistance. Those decaying libraries aren't just monuments to neglected knowledge, they're evidence of a modern addiction to ease. The Stoics saw this coming 2,000 years ago. While we curate our lives for maximum convenience, they practiced something radical, voluntary discomfort. Epictetus, who endured slavery before teaching philosophy, put it bluntly, difficulties show what men are. Therefore, when a difficulty befalls you, remember that God is training you. He didn't say this to glorify suffering, but to reveal hardship as the whetstone that sharpens character. Consider the contrast. On one side, a couch with a smartphone scrolling through bite-sized entertainment. On the other, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, its margins filled with underlines and question marks. The first offers instant gratification. The second demands effort, wrestling with sentences that don't yield their meaning easily. The Stoics didn't avoid challenging texts, they sought them out, knowing that growth thrives at the edge of understanding. Seneca deliberately read complex works slowly, writing, I don't just pass my eyes over words, I weigh them. That's the difference between consuming and engaging. One fills time, the other transforms it. Here's the uncomfortable truth hidden in those abandoned stacks. Comfort isn't neutral. It's a slow erosion of resilience. Every time we choose the effortless over the demanding, we're not just avoiding a book, we're avoiding the growth it could spark. The Stoics called this ascesis, the disciplined practice of embracing hardship to strengthen the mind. For them, it wasn't about self-punishment, but self-mastery. Musonius Rufus, another Stoic teacher, made his students sleep on the ground in winter not because beds were scarce, but to prove, what we fear is not hardship, but our fear of it. So here's your challenge, start small. Tonight, take a cold shower, not freezing, just uncomfortably cool. stand under that water and notice every instinct screaming to turn the knob to warmth, then don't. That moment of resistance is where Stoic training begins. It's not about the temperature, it's about recognizing that discomfort won't break you. Epictetus trained his students this way, saying, "First learn to bear the chill, then you'll stop fearing life's winters." Those empty libraries are filled with books we tell ourselves we'll read when we have time. But time isn't the issue, courage is. The next time you reach for the easy option, pause. Ask, is this comfort serving my growth or stalling it? The answer might change more than your reading habits. When was the last time you felt genuine awe, not just passing interest, but that deep, humbling wonder that stops you in your tracks? Those forgotten books gathering dust aren't just neglected knowledge, they're abandoned portals to amazement. The Stoics didn't just study philosophy, they practiced daily reverence for existence itself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Take in the whole universe in your mind how all things dissolve into one another, how cooperation weaves through every thread of life." That's not poetic fluff. It's a radical lens for seeing the world. While we scroll past headlines designed to shock or entertain, the Stoics trained themselves to marvel at the ordinary, the precision of a spider's web, the unfathomable scale of the night sky, the miracle of breath flowing in and out without conscious effort. Consider the contrast. On one side, a clickbait title screaming, "You won't believe what happened next." On the other, Seneca's quiet observation. If you find yourself unimpressed by the usual wonders, ask, have you really seen them or just looked? The difference isn't just in subject matter, it's in posture. One reduces reality to a spectacle, while the other invites participation in mystery. Ancient libraries weren't just storage for facts, they were cathedrals of curiosity, where every scroll held the potential to rearrange someone's understanding of existence. Today, we've traded awe for algorithms, mistaking the dopamine hit of novelty for the lasting resonance of genuine discovery. Here's the experiment hidden in those silent stacks. Tonight, step outside and trace the constellations, not to name them, but to feel their distance. A light year isn't just a unit of measurement. It's a bridge between your gaze and a star that might already be gone by the time its light reaches you. The Stoics called this sympatheia, the profound interconnectedness of all things. When Marcus wrote, "The universe is change, life is understanding," he wasn't describing abstraction. He was pointing to the visceral truth that every atom in your body was forged in ancient stellar explosions. You don't just live in the universe, you are the universe, momentarily arranged as a thinking, feeling being. So put down the device for 10 minutes and pick up a leaf instead. Study its veins like a map of some unknown world. That's not whimsy, it's resistance. In a culture that monetizes your attention by making everything feel urgent, reclaiming awe is an act of defiance. The Stoics knew this. Wonder isn't passive, it's the antidote to indifference. Those abandoned books didn't lose their magic. We just forgot how to slow down enough to feel it. The next time you pass a library, let it remind you, the most revolutionary thought isn't always new. Sometimes it's waiting patiently on page 63 of a book no one checks out anymore. Why do we instinctively reach for the light, breezy article instead of the dense philosophical text? It's not just about time, it's about something deeper, a quiet resistance to the weight of real understanding. Those abandoned libraries aren't just filled with old books, they're monuments to our collective preference for the shallows. The Stoics, though, swam against this current with deliberate force. Seneca put it starkly, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." He wasn't dismissing fear, he was calling us to face it, to stare down life's complexities without flinching. That's the heart of Stoic courage, not the absence of discomfort, but the willingness to sit with it until it yields wisdom. Walk into any bookstore today, and you'll find aisles of self-help promising 5 easy steps to happiness. Contrast that with Epictetus's discourses where he insists, first, say to yourself what you would be, then do what you must. No quick fixes, no sugarcoating, just the raw truth that growth demands friction. The difference between these approaches isn't just tone, it's intent. One sells comfort, the other cultivates resilience. Ancient libraries thrived because their readers understood this. They didn't seek texts to confirm what they already believed. They sought challenges to dismantle their assumptions. A scroll wasn't just read, it was grappled with, like a wrestler testing their strength against a worthy opponent. Here's the uncomfortable gap we've created. We've turned wisdom into content, reducing profound ideas to shareable quotes stripped of context. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations wasn't a series of inspirational postcards. It was a soldier's private reckoning with fear, mortality, and duty. Yet today, we're more likely to encounter a pixelated snippet of his writing on social media than to sit with the full weight of his thoughts. The irony. The very passages we skim for quick motivation were born from relentless introspection, the kind that doesn't just uplift but unsettles. This week, try something radical. Pick one text, a single essay, a chapter, even a poem that makes you uneasy, not because it's obscure, but because it demands something of you. Read it slowly, then read it again. Underline the sentence that prickles your defenses. That resistance, it's the sound of growth knocking. The Stoics didn't build their philosophy on pleasantries. They forged it in the friction between what we want to hear and what we need to face. Your mind, like those abandoned libraries, has room for more than easy answers. It's waiting for the books that leave you different than when you started. Walk into an abandoned library and you'll notice something unexpected. It's not just books that are missing. It's the noise, the endless chatter of opinions, hot takes, and half-formed thoughts that fill our daily lives like static on a radio. How many voices do we actually need? The Stoics asked this question long before the age of information overload. Their answer was radical, almost none. Epictetus put it bluntly, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. He wasn't just warning against anger, he was revealing a deeper truth. We're the gatekeepers of our own minds, and every opinion we let in takes up space meant for wisdom. Consider the contrast. Ancient scholars would retreat to libraries for silence, while today we drown in talk shows, podcasts, and comment sections, all competing for our mental real estate. The Stoics practiced something called the discipline of assent, the art of pausing before absorbing an idea, like a bouncer checking ID at the door of your mind. Marcus Aurelius journaled at night not to record others' opinions, but to sift through his own. He wrote, "You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to disturb you." That's the power of filtering. Not every thought deserves a seat at the table of your attention. Here's the experiment hiding in those silent stacks. For one day, observe your thoughts like a scientist, without reaction, without judgment. Notice how many voices in your head aren't even yours. Ads, jingles, viral slogans, fragments of arguments you overheard. The Stoics called this prosoch, vigilant awareness of the mind's clutter. Seneca would take regular silence retreats, not to escape the world, but to hear himself think. In a culture that equates noise with value, choosing quiet isn't just countercultural, it's revolutionary. Try this today. Next time you reach for your phone to fill a quiet moment, stop. Let the silence stretch until it becomes uncomfortable, then stretch it further. That's where the Stoics found gold, not in the absence of sound, but in the presence of their own unfiltered thoughts. The abandoned libraries remind us, wisdom doesn't shout. It waits. Open any abandoned book in that crumbling library, and you'll find more than yellowed pages. You'll find stolen time. not just the hours lost since its last reader, but the lifetimes we squandered chasing trivialities while wisdom gathers dust. The Stoics measured wealth not in gold but in moments. Seneca's words cut deeper today than ever. You're living as if destined to live forever. Your own frailty never occurs to you. You waste time as if drawing from a full supply, though all the while that day you devote to someone or something may be your last. That's the paradox. In an age of time-saving gadgets, we've become bankrupt of meaningful hours. Do the math. The average person spends 3 hours daily on entertainment, media equivalent to reading meditations cover to cover every week for a year. We binge entire series in weekends yet don't have time for 10 pages of philosophy. Marcus Aurelius ruled the known world at dawn and reflected in stillness by dusk, writing, "You could leave life right now." Let that determine what you do and say and think. His memento mori practice wasn't morbid, it was financial, an audit of time's true expenditure. When death is the ledger's final line, every distraction becomes a debt against your potential. Notice the contrast. One evening spent rewatching comfort shows versus the same hours with Seneca's letters. The first leaves you with recycled plot lines. The second arms you with insights tested across millennia. Ancient libraries weren't just repositories, they were time multipliers, where a single hour with Aristotle could reshape centuries of thought. Today, we've flipped the equation, trading depth for dopamine hits that evaporate by sunrise. Epictetus saw this coming. If you seek tranquility, do less, or more accurately, do what's essential, do less but better. Here's your challenge. For the next 7 days, track every hour like a Stoic accountant. Highlight 3 time expenditures that align with your deepest values and 3 that hemorrhage minutes without return. Then, this is crucial, reallocate just 30 stolen minutes daily to neglected shelves, physical or mental. Not as obligation, but as reinvestment. As Seneca warned, life is long if you know how to use it. Those decaying books aren't judging your choices. They're waiting to remind you that time, once lost, is the only currency you can never earn back. We scroll through endless feeds, hearts and comments piling up. Yet why does it feel like we're shouting into a void? Those abandoned libraries, with their empty chairs where readers once sat shoulder to shoulder, reveal a paradox. We've never been more connected, yet genuine fellowship feels harder to find. The Stoics saw this coming. While we mistake digital chatter for community, they built bonds through something far more enduring: shared pursuit of wisdom. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." He wasn't just talking about cooperation. He was pointing to the profound truth that human connection thrives when rooted in mutual growth, not just mutual distraction. Picture 2 scenes. 1. A glowing screen where hundreds of friends react to a curated post with emojis. The other, a candlelit study group in ancient Athens, where voices clash over Plato's texts, minds sharpening each other like blades on stone. The first offers the illusion of belonging, the second demands the friction of real engagement. Stoic fellowship wasn't about comfort, it was about challenge. Epictetus gathered students not to echo his ideas but to test them. If you want to improve, he'd say, surround yourself with those who'll tell you the truth, not what you want to hear. That's the difference between empty connection and the kind that leaves you transformed. Here's the uncomfortable gap we've created. We've replaced study partners with followers, debates with like buttons. A Stoic wouldn't reject modern tools, but they'd ask, does this deepen understanding or dilute it? Seneca's letters to Lucilius weren't performative. They were bridges between minds, each line crafted to provoke thought, not applause. Compare that to our endless scroll, a sea of takes designed for quick consumption, not contemplation. The abandoned libraries whisper a warning. Without shared purpose, connection becomes a numbers game. So try this today. Reach out to one person, not to vent or gossip, but to wrestle with an idea that matters. Share a passage from Marcus or Seneca and ask, how does this land for you? Then listen, truly listen, not just to respond, but to understand. The Stoics knew real kinship isn't found in the crowd's noise, but in the quiet space between two people daring to think deeply together. Those empty reading rooms, they're not just relics. They're invitations to rebuild something we've lost, not more connections, but better ones. Walk through the forgotten stacks of an abandoned library, and you might miss them, the names etched into checkout cards, the marginal notes in fading ink, the hands that once placed these books into waiting hands. We remember the famous philosophers, but who recalls the librarians who guided readers to them, or the teachers who whispered, "This one will change you," pointing to a shelf where Epictetus or Seneca waited. The Stoics understood this tension: deep reverence for those who light the path, yet absolute responsibility for walking it ourselves. Epictetus, who began life as a slave before becoming one of history's most influential teachers, put it plainly: don't just say you have read books. Show how they have changed you. That's the Stoic balance: gratitude for mentors, but refusal to outsource our thinking to them. Compare two learning scenes: a modern self-help guru packaging wisdom into 10-second clips, promising transformation without effort, versus Socrates in the Athenian agora, answering questions with sharper questions until his students sweat with revelation. The first sells certainty, the second cultivates the tools to question everything. Ancient teachers didn't want followers, they wanted equals. When Marcus Aurelius penned his private meditations, he filled them with debts to his tutors. From Rusticus, "I learned not to be led astray by mere imitation." From Apollonius, independence of spirit. Notice what he honored, not their answers, but their methods for finding them. Here's the challenge those empty library chairs leave us: who shaped your mind? Not the influencers you passively consume, but those who handed you the mental crowbar to pry open your own assumptions. Maybe it was a professor who saw potential you didn't, a grandparent whose stories held hidden lessons, or even a book that felt like its author was speaking directly to you across centuries. Stoicism asks us to do two things at once: cherish these guides while remembering, as Seneca wrote, "The best ideas are those you make your own through testing." Every great teacher's goal is to become unnecessary, to equip you to walk alone. So here's your invitation today: reach out to someone who widened your world, not with a generic thanks, but by telling them specifically what you've done with what they gave you. And then, in true Stoic fashion, pay it forward. Share a book that changed you, not just by passing it along, but by discussing the questions it forced you to confront. Those abandoned libraries remind us that ideas don't die from disuse. They die when we stop passing them on with the same fire they were given to us. The shelves may gather dust, but the chain of mentorship never has to break. When was the last time you sat in complete silence, not just the absence of noise, but the kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts echo like footsteps in an empty library? Those dusty halls aren't just empty of people, they're missing something more telling: the hum of distraction we've come to rely on like a crutch. The Stoics didn't just tolerate silence, they sought it out as fertile ground for the mind. Seneca wrote, "The voice within needs no interpreter, but you must be still enough to hear it." That's the paradox of our age. We've never had more ways to listen, yet we've forgotten how to hear ourselves. Think about the contrast. Today, we fill every spare moment with podcasts, playlists, and background noise, as if silence were a void to be feared. But walk through those abandoned stacks, and you'll notice something revealing: the absence of speakers, of screens, of anything designed to drown out thought. The Stoics practiced something radical, intentional listening, not just to others, but to the whispers of their own judgments and desires. Marcus Aurelius would retreat to his quarters after leading armies, not to scroll through updates, but to wrestle with his journal. The silence wasn't passive, it was an arena where clarity fought distraction and won. Here's the experiment hidden in Seneca's words: trade one podcast this week for a walk with no audio at all. Notice how your mind rebels at first, scrambling to fill the void with mental chatter or the itch to check your phone. That discomfort is the sound of withdrawal from the dopamine hits of constant stimulation, from the illusion that productivity means always being plugged in. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but the liberation from being jerked around by every passing impulse. Silence for them wasn't empty, it was the space where purpose took shape. Try this today. Carve out 20 minutes, no devices, no background music, no distractions. Sit with the question, what am I avoiding by staying noisy? You might find, as Epictetus did, that most of what fills our days is just sound and fury, signifying nothing. Those abandoned libraries hold a mirror to our unease. We've built a world that drowns out the very silence where wisdom grows. The books aren't gone, we've just forgotten how to sit still long enough to let them speak. Why do we dismiss old books as irrelevant the moment their spines crack? There's a quiet arrogance in assuming that newer must mean better, that wisdom expires like milk on a shelf. The Stoics saw this trap clearly. They didn't chase trends. They returned to fundamentals like blacksmiths hammering the same anvil for generations. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly, truth wears no expiration date. He didn't scribble those words in the margins of some fashionable scroll. He carved them into his daily practice while ruling an empire. The enduring principles he relied on, self-control, perspective, resilience, weren't groundbreaking then, and they aren't now. That's the point. Take modern obsession with fad diets each year brings a new miracle regimen promising transformation, while the Stoic virtue of temperance whispers the same lesson it did 2,000 years ago. Mastery begins when you stop letting impulses dictate your plate. The difference isn't in the advice, it's in our willingness to hear it. Ancient libraries weren't filled with disposable bestsellers. They housed texts that survived precisely because they refused to cater to fleeting tastes. Seneca mocked the trend chasers of his era. They leap from book to book like birds hopping branches, tasting everything, digesting nothing. Sound familiar? Here's the challenge hidden in those dusty pages. Pick up a foundational Stoic text, Meditations, Letters from a Stoic, Discourses, and read it not as a relic but as a mirror. Notice how Marcus Aurelius frets over the same distractions we do, how Seneca wrestles with time management like a modern productivity guru. The irony. Their solutions feel radical today precisely because they're so uncomplicated. No life hacks, no algorithms, just the relentless refinement of character. Epictetus didn't need an app to remind his students. First learn the meaning of what you say and then speak. He knew simplicity outlasts novelty every time. So tonight, bypass the shiny new release and pull an old favorite off the shelf. Read it slowly, like you're meeting an old friend who sees through your excuses. The Stoics didn't preserve these texts to be museum pieces. They left them as crowbars, meant to pry open minds that confuse motion with progress. The next time you're tempted by the cult of the new, ask yourself, is this trend serving my growth or just my fear of missing out? The answer might surprise you. The flickering lamplight of an ancient scholar's study wasn't just illumination, it was ceremony. Each evening, the meticulous unrolling of a scroll, the deliberate positioning of ink and stylus, the ritualistic stillness before the first word was read. These weren't mere habits, they were sacred acts, transforming ordinary moments into thresholds of focus. The Stoics didn't just practice philosophy, they enshrined it in daily rites, understanding what we've forgotten. Depth isn't found in accident, but in architecture. Epictetus laid bare the connection. First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you must, but do it every dawn without fail. That, without fail, wasn't about discipline alone, it was about consecration. Consider 2 mornings. One begins with a groggy hand silencing a blaring alarm, then immediately diving into emails and headlines. The other unfolds like Marcus Aurelius' dawn, rising before the sun to light a single candle, journal in hand, asking, "What evil do I bring into the world today? What virtue will I strengthen?" The difference isn't just in action, but in intention. Ancient study wasn't squeezed between notifications. It was bracketed by rituals that signaled to the mind, this space is set apart. Seneca described his evening examen as returning borrowed time, not a quick mental recap, but a structured dialogue with his conscience, weighing each action against Stoic virtues as carefully as a merchant balances ledgers. Modern life has stripped away these thresholds, leaving us adrift in a sea of undifferentiated hours. We check news feeds in bed and call it waking up, skim emails over breakfast and call it planning. The Stoics would recognize this as more than disorganization. It's a failure of reverence. Their rituals weren't rigid schedules, they were mindful transitions, like the architectural vestibules of Roman homes that marked the passage from chaotic streets to ordered inner courtyards. Epictetus trained his students to physically alter their posture before study, straightening the spine, steadying the breath, not as affectation, but as somatic signal. The body tells the mind when it's time to deepen. Here's your invitation. Carve out one ritual this week, not another productivity hack, but a ceremonial beginning or ending. Light a candle before reading philosophy, not for ambience, but as a vow. For this flame's duration, I belong to wisdom. Or borrow Seneca's nightly reckoning with 3 questions. Where did I stray from reason today? When did I confuse control with surrender? What will I mend at dawn? The key lies in consistency, not complexity. Marcus' journaling ritual often filled just a few lines, but those lines were written daily for decades, compounding into the meditations we still ponder today. Those abandoned reading nooks weren't just spaces, they were sanctuaries built by small, repeated acts of devotion. Rebuilding them starts not with grand gestures, but with the quiet determination to mark one moment each day as sacred, a standing appointment with your highest self. The books may gather dust, but the ritual waits, patient as a lamp in the dark, ready to be lit anew. Picture those empty library halls one last time, not as relics of the past, but as blueprints for the future. The cracks in their marble floors trace a map back to something we've misplaced. The courage to think deeply in a world that rewards skimming, to value silence in an age addicted to noise, to tend to timeless truths while trends scream for our attention. Stoicism doesn't ask us to abandon modernity. It hands us a sieve, teaching us to filter the ephemeral from the essential. Those crumbling shelves aren't just warnings, they're invitations. Every dusty book whispers the same question. What will you build in the empty spaces of your attention? Marcus Aurelius left us a clue in his Meditations, comparing the mind to a garden. You have power over your own mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Tend to what's within you, for there lies the harvest. That's the heart of it. Rebuilding our inner libraries starts with recognizing that every scroll, every shelf, every quiet corner must be cultivated deliberately. You wouldn't expect roses to bloom in untilled soil. Why expect wisdom to grow in an untended mind? Here's where philosophy becomes practice. Choose one Stoic tool this week, just one, and wield it like a trowel in that garden. Maybe it's the evening review where you weigh your day's actions like a jeweler assessing gems, or the discipline of ascent, pausing before absorbing every passing thought as truth. It could be as simple as leaving your phone behind on a morning walk, letting your thoughts unspool like parchment in the quiet. The key isn't grand gestures, it's daily tending. As this journey closes, remember, those abandoned libraries didn't crumble in a day. Their decay was the slow result of choices, small neglects compounding over time. But revival works the same way. Each time you choose depth over distraction, solitude over scrolling, you're laying a new stone in the architecture of your mind. The Stoics didn't preserve their wisdom for museums. They passed it to us as a challenge, a torch to carry forward. So take what resonates and begin. And if you're hungry for more ways to reclaim your attention in this distracted age, consider joining us, not as passive listeners, but as fellow cultivators of quiet wisdom. The shelves may be dusty, but the ink hasn't faded. The next chapter starts with your hand